and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are continuing our discussion on How to Lie to a Customs Agent by Carlos Fidel Espinoza. In this episode, we will be focusing on the second half of the collection.
Awesome. Good job.
All right.
Tried to get Carlos here super last minute. So
It's okay.
In case we don't have a chance to get to him, you can hear from him himself when we did a Papagayo session with him last year. It's on YouTube. We just type in Papagayo, Carlos Fidel Espinoza. It'll show up. Just, in case he talks more about the book. He reads from the book, and then we ask questions. In case we don't have the chance to do that this time around. But yeah, part 2.
Hopefully we do.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get a chance to talk to him because we have some questions that we would like to ask him.
Maybe we can just end the episode asking those questions.
Yeah. We'll see. So we're talking about the second half, not part 2. It's part 2 of the podcast, but I'm talking about the second half of the collection. And I'll just start by saying that I really enjoyed the second half a lot more. I feel like the tone shifted a bit in some of these poems, and there was more focus on other subjects like his daughters and his mother. And yet he did mention the speaker in previous poems, but the tone shifted, I felt like. And so there was a lot of that I enjoyed reading. There's more historical figures. The imagery stood out more to me as well.
Some really good images.
And some of my favorite poems like Mother Dust and Desert Fauna are in the second half as well. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed how just the closing of the collection, especially the last poem, which we'll get to. What did you all think?
I'm always going to let you go first.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I really liked the second half of the collection as well. I liked the desert imagery. I feel like it kind of starts to shift more towards the beauty, I think. In the first half, it feels more like the desert is representative a lot more of death, and I don't feel, while it still is doing that in the second half, I feel like there's also more representation of the beauty of the desert in that same image, I guess. I don't know.
And there's still a lot of death, but it's more like there's an acceptance of it.
Yeah, there's
beautiful.
reconciling.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, so it's such a collection of border poems, right? A lot of it takes place in El Paso and in Juarez and of Crossing. And it's not necessarily of one speaker, right? Because I think there's a lot of just also immigration too. And of course, the whole policing of the border, I think still there's a lot of protest and riot. And I think finding strength, resilience, and womanhood. Talk about how in this section there's a lot of calls to his grandmother, his wife, his daughters that are much, much more optimistic at times. Or if not even that, just like they have agency.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just like they don't serve the purpose of just an image in a poem like they did in the beginning, where the focus was on the speaker, the father figure, the husband, his demons, that kind of thing, or his resentment. It's more about their beauty, their resilience, their strength. Those later poems. So I do like that shift.
Since that's what I was trying to allude to at the end of the last episode, the previous episode on this, is that there's a natural growth that you see from beginning to the end of the collection that is one dealing with those demons, and it's ugly and it's not pretty, but we always have to acknowledge them before we can move on from them. Often.
Yeah.
Speaking of border poetry, like I guess poetry that's so specific to the border and its people and the land and stuff, like I wonder how, or if it speaks in the, I mean, obviously it doesn't speak in the same way to readers outside of the border. So I'm wondering, someone who doesn't live on the border who reads this, like how do they read these poems and this voice, and do they understand it in the same way that we do? And I don't mean that in a condescending way, like do they understand it? Like obviously, but more like, do they get the same out of it that we do when he's mentioning, Juarez and very specific things that the Franklin Mountain, like just, landscape.
Yeah.
I'm curious to like reception outside of the border for this collection.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, I guess just like any other time we read of other places, we get the gist of it, but we haven't experienced it.
Right.
But locally, because we talked about this too when we read Ben's Signs. It's it's great to have literature of streets that we recognize, of communities we recognize, bar names, or just customs and things that we do. He talks about partying in Juarez like a lot of us did when we were teenagers, and those kinds of things, and then just other aspects too. Shopping, going to the mercado, going and buying food, and if anything, it's a nice little snapshot for people who haven't been here.
Yeah.
And conveys a sense of how he's experienced it to them. Right. Which I can relate to a lot of them.
Yeah, me too. I think that's kind of the nice thing of living on the border and being a border poet or just writer or artist, and already knowing that you have a community that's going to relate to and accept your art because it's so familiar. I think that's nice. But I just, and I guess it goes the other way too, right? Like we read all these white, old, dead dudes all the time, and we're like, okay, yeah, well, this was Ireland in the 1800s, I guess. I don't know. It might have been, but
take your word for it.
Yeah, we can only imagine so much, and I guess it's always different if you've lived it, right? But it's nice, I'm always pushing for that, and I think we've talked about that a lot on the podcast about, telling your story, because it's going to be familiar to someone, but it's also your own story to tell, right? So we need to keep doing that. Keep sharing our stories.
Absolutely. And so I think one particular border story I think is, about 10 years ago, a bunch of us met this dude by the name of Peter Schwarzbein. And he was at the time a graduate student in an art program. And so his art project was to reimagine the international streetcar that at one time was part of the border. In other words, the car would travel freely between U.S. and Mexico, so people can be part of both parts of their economies. And that was such an interesting project because eventually, it was a conceptual thing, and he created these like posters, like making the border safe again, I think was one of the taglines, which is interesting because it was like pre-Make America Great Again, whatever. It was like, that was kind of one of the taglines. He even had like all sorts of trolley art. And what was super interesting about that is Schwarzbein ended up running for city council and like getting on city council. And he ended up bringing back streetcars in downtown El Paso. That was one of his visions. So, to a lot of chagrin, a lot of people who criticized some of the spending, the creation of the baseball stadium, and the same fighting against an arena, tearing down historical Duranguito, criticized the streetcar. What was the point of it? Doesn't cover a whole lot. It's kind of more of like a aesthetic thing. Anyway, regardless of how you feel, though, it's a callback to the international streetcar, and that is and that's what kind of Carlos is referencing in the poem "Why El Paso No Longer Has a Streetcar That Goes Across into Mexico." This is one of my favorites in the entire collection because it also references some historical figures. So I'll note that. Shout out, by the way, to David Romo. He's a noted El Paso historian. His book, Ringside Seat to the Revolution, is pretty notable, I think, in El Paso reading. So if it's definitely, if you live in El Paso, if you live in the region and you like to read, get that book. I think it's essential reading. But here you get a little bit of that. And the reason why I mention that is because David and Carlos are close friends. They've been in bands together. We've all played together on the stage, and we're all musicians as well, right? But
I thought you were gonna say on the streets.
Bands, same, yeah, always. But bringing in David's historicism, that's really important. And so in this poem, we learn about Carmelita Torres, right, the 70-year-old who started a riot, and this is based on a true story. Yeah. But as we were saying right now, it kind of turns into it mythologizes it into like this grand thing, almost. I would say magical realism, even though there aren't any real elements of magical in there. But like the fact that you have groups of women protesting this practice on the border to delouse, to spray chemicals on people coming over.
And for it to be a 17-year-old girl who's the one who's like, wait a minute, this is wrong, or I'm not going to do this today, or I'm going to stop this. Yeah. And talking to other women and it being like, okay, now it's 10, now it's 20, now it's 200, now it's a few thousand people who are like protesting. We don't want this anymore. And so it's a very powerful story that often gets overlooked or not even, taught in any history classes, right? Like Vanessa, you hadn't heard of Carmelita Torres, and she's such an important figure in the border, right? And even there's like Casa Carmelita that's still, it's a migrant house today that was named after her. So I mean, there's still remnants of that historical figure that we see today, and I really enjoyed this poem too because of that. It gives her this larger than life, even though it was it was a great moment for her and for women, for Mexican women on the border, but it's still like made it even more larger than life in the poem.
Exactly. And the way it's told and the way it's almost like a father, like to me, I imagine this figure as a father reading as a bedtime story to his daughters. Like that's almost like the way it ends.
Yeah.
And also I first learned about, you're talking about the way it's taught. I first learned about this from a band, Frontera Bugulú, who's still rocking in El Paso. And they play cumbia. But the lead singer, the accordion player, Kiko, he's down with the Chicano movement. Like his father is really important, has been a big figure in that movement as well. And, you think of cumbia, you think of dancing and partying, but in particular, one of the reasons why I love Frontera Bugulú is a lot of their stuff is also social justice. And so I learned about Carmelita Torres through them first, and then afterwards going to grad school just reading more. Yeah, totally. But I like the way this ends, we talk a lot about like, obviously customs agents, border patrol agents have a big presence in the book. But, when we talk about the militarization of the border, we also have Fort Bliss here. And this is one of the instances where you do also see the Army troops, right, come in to play. And the whole mythologization of it is, I just kind of love, right? Kind of towards the end. But the fronterizas were too fierce, devouring the soldiers, tearing at their hearts and lighting them on fire. And that is why El Paso no longer has streetcars that cross into Mexico. Like, it's that ending that it just makes me feel like it's a bedtime storytelling of like, be fierce. And I think there's into that later when he also talks about like Mother Wolf, or it's one of those, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll talk about that because I love that one a lot too. But definitely check out her story if you have not had a chance. I know Sergio Troncoso also writes about that.
He does, yeah.
And his collection of stories, A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
So check that out.
It's a really good book, too.
Cool. What else do we have here? I mean, there's a lot of...
I liked the customs. It's just like, referencing back to, like, he's already been talking about the Border Patrol agents and stuff, and how it's traitorous to be Mexican and be an agent. What stood out to me, I really like the last lines. It's on page 49.
Yeah.
He's great at camouflaging with the desert because the vato is built like a nopal. Which I thought was a really great image, but also reminds me of like that saying, con el nopal en la frente. Like, if you don't know Spanish, but you look brown or Mexican, or like you should know Spanish. There's that saying that, esta persona no sabe español, pero tiene el nopal en la frente. Like, he has a
Like the
nopal
looks,
on his forehead, which is just a saying to say that, he looks super Mexican but can't speak Spanish. Anyway, it just reminded me of that because Avato was built like a nopal. So he looks the part, but he's playing the...
And then just the imagery of it that being played into effect of like he's great at camouflaging in the desert.
Exactly, yeah. So it has that dual.
So
meaning for me.
when Carlos sent me a draft of a lot of these poems, this is one of the lines that stuck out to me that I just told him like, "Damn, dude, this is good."
Yeah, it's good.
Could even probably share the comment right now. Like, it was a little different, A lot of these poems have shifted a lot since that process, but I don't know. Also, just like the imagery of dressing up like Spider-Man on the weekends, but also him wearing wearing the pants, the tights under his costumes. So under his uniform, I think quite the imagery. It's a little funny, but. And you get a lot of desert poems here. The one before this and the one after. I don't know if you had any lines or anything you liked from those, Vanessa.
Yeah, I liked Desert Fauna. So the next poem. So bottom of page 50 going into 51. Together we were music that only plays when our skin touches. I really liked those lines.
Yeah.
And I really like, this is something that he does throughout the collection. The use of like the tongue, just like
Lingual.
the way that it feels in his mouth, the way like using it to mean language, just the way that he uses that word in different ways throughout. I really liked.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I like that. I like that. And even as I was reading it earlier, I was like, dang, I think Vanessa's going to like this line. Music reference.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I like that part. Like the next few stanzas, I wanted to cup you between my legs and chest as we sleep on our sides, to keep from choking on our thick tongues that are pregnant with sonnets.
Yeah.
It's beautifully written. Yeah. I do notice a lot of times when he's talking about the desert, he references like bones or specific anatomy, like body parts, like hollow bones, femur, ribs, teeth, gums, like it's all over this poetry, especially when he's referencing the desert, which I think is a really interesting kind of, it gives the desert life in a different way, but it's also like, again, focusing, like when he's talking about death and funerals and stuff, he also focuses on femurs and bones. So it's like the interlacing of life and death in the desert being like the center
goes on
of that.
Yeah, the power of it too. Like at once, it's an image of us, right? And it's body imagery, body images. Yeah. Also, that's that question that started off the first piece of the entire collection, right? And I think one of the questions he asks is what happens to bones that are left in the desert, sun dried, bleached in the sun, like.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really strong lines in this one, I think. One of my favorite ones is towards the beginning. She hated the desert dirt that coats everything, including her tongue. And I just, because like this one to me represented language. So the way that the desert changes the way that she spoke. Yeah, and just like that comparison, like from the desert to like the way it ultimately changed how she kind of saw things, I guess.
Okay. I mean, so one of the things that we learned from him in other interviews, we're kind of listening to one right now, the Papagayo one. And, he says it, and we read it. A lot of this is around his mom. So here's another one of, we get a little bit more of her background, right? And just about her demise, Demise sounds so rough, but I mean, what she was going through at the time. It does reference chemotherapy.
It's an interesting poem because it's like discussing wanting to leave the desert, being called back to the desert, like leaving and coming back, which I think is a theme we see a lot in border poetry or just border literature in general, like leaving, being called back to. So this is one of those, and it's an interesting discussion on that, like feeling forced to because of the illness. And it's a hard one to read, I think, especially like knowing or anticipating like what's going to happen with the mother figure here.
It's kind of an inverse take though on a lot of the desert imagery too, I mean, I guess in the same way, like this place is death kind of tone. The next one is the eponymous poem, the name of the entire collection. By the way, I mean, so before even reading it, what did the title like strike in you guys in terms of interest or curiosity or preconceptions? What do you feel about the title? Because I don't even know if we mentioned that last time, did we?
No, I mean anything that's titled "How to." It's like a how-to manual. It's like, is it a self-help thing? And then how to lie to a customs agent. Like, okay, it's not a self-help book. It's a how-to book. It felt like, So that was a really bold choice, I think, to choose that as the title. This title poem as a title for his book.
Do you think it has the power to offend people?
For sure. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been taking this around town like for the past couple of weeks, and I've gotten more questions on this one, and I take books everywhere, and I've gotten more questions about this one just because of the title. Like, what is that you're reading? So it's definitely like provocative and, you know, can be offensive to some, which I think is a point, right?
Oh,
Like,
totally, right?
especially
Yeah.
if you're reading these poems, some of them are going to offend you or might not, but at least they'll get you thinking about these topics. And I do think that that's a point. I think that might be what Carlos is trying to do. And so it's a smart choice in some ways towards the right kind of audience, right?
Well, it's definitely meant to shake things up, right? Like, a lot of people, stay with the norm, status quo,
What's safe?
follow laws, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you're not used to questioning authority, it does kind of catch you off guard. Why would you want to lie to a customs agent, And so, I mean, pair this up with the fact that you have some indigenous kind of looking art there in the front. What I always tell my students pre-reading, before you even read the book, like, what can you glean from the title, any art, any other like text before you even read the book, and you tell it's gonna have you questioning some things. So I don't know. I just wanted to mention that since this is now we're at the poem it's named after, and this is one of my favorites, and this is about social protests, kind of like calling out some of the ridiculousness of the militarization and patrolling. Like here you see is a grandmother here, kind of. I mean, there's a little bit more to it, right? But the whole idea of her not being able to bring in seeds and like that, a corn is a corn is a corn. He uses that kind of rhetorical technique earlier too. I forget which one it's at, or is it at some point
Later.
in this? Yeah, later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A dog is a dog.
a dog is a dog. Ah, poor Bruno.
We don't talk
We don't talk
about
about
Bruno.
He would come up. But I just love this idea of like her putting up a fight, and it carries that same essence of Carmelita Torres.
Yeah.
Stirring,
The
stirring
resistance
some shit.
on the border. Yeah.
And this is totally Carlos's voice, right? She knew that old Raramuri 1-2 Jack Johnson slip. That boxing metaphor or reference. And then just the talking, that's my citizenship began. She rolled the R's on her tongue until they became an assault on Anglo-American accents. My grandfather's ghost smiled down from the sky, his gold tooth, the gleaming sun. Eso, yeah, eso. Kind of cool little like communication to acknowledgement.
It's supposed to be Rara Muri, right?
Urara muri.
Okay. Just wondering.
Urara.
Some editing
Yeah.
issues.
Exactly. So that wasn't fixed. Okay, I have an earlier version. So that was.
Well, because there was a poem, right, about the Raramuri, like the runner, the tia or something, right? Like earlier.
Tarahumara.
Tarahumara Tia's feet. Yes. It's on page 32. Anyway, it's not here. I thought it was here. Raramuri's, but it's the same. Anyway, I'm like, is that a typo? Ruramuri. It's supposed to be Raramuri. Yes. Okay. Okay.
The oldest limpia in the world.
Yeah, I really like these part 1 and part 2. We were talking about this pre-show, the imagery in both of these, the imagery of the daughter in part 1, the imagery of the curandera in part 2. I really enjoyed. I mean, it's always one of those things, again, like with curanderismo, it's like how much of it is myth, how much of it is science or medicine or whatever. But, and it seems like such a crazy ritual, like putting a blanket over the daughter and then just like hitting her with palm leaves. It's kind of a funny scene, but it worked, and as I was reading it, I'm like, there's no doubt in my mind it's gonna work. This curandera is like legit, and it did. So it's still pretty funny, and just I really enjoy the imagery in those two poems.
That's specific. I want to ask like, cause it's pretty specific on like what she does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even a leaf, and I was like, is that something that you know personally or experienced? Like, I've never, I know about them, but I've never experienced like to the details.
Mm-hmm. I know. I'm trying to get
Thrashes.
Gris to do a limpia on me.
Ooh,
We
no,
haven't.
okay.
I know we haven't figured out a time to do it, but
Oh
I
damn,
need to reach out. I know.
that's a true gift.
I know, for real. And it works. So, some people might be like hesitant or, towards that kind of healing art.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, we've been brought up with Western medicine and that works. So, whatever works. Right.
Yeah.
Well, just leaving off of Ballad of Love and Glory, right?
Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah, and that curanderismo in that book is really, I think Reina Grande really discussed it in a beautiful way, like tradition and like generational practice. It was very nicely done. I wish I would have seen more.
That would have been great.
Yeah, because it kind of felt like it was leading up to that. She talked a lot about the grandmother, and then when the grandmother was gone, it was like, okay, we're passing it on to the main character of Jimena, but then it kind of just died off. So, kind of wish you would have seen a little more of that. But I guess in the sequel, maybe.
When never mind. Let's make a joke coming over there. From Mars. Where does she go? Right at the end, I know.
You both liked Mother Wolf, right? On 58.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's just like a really sweet poem. I like I guess like the last lines in each stanza. Your mother has gifted you with eyes that can see through the night, with eyes that can see through men. And then it ends with saying, when you grow up, you will understand why your mother's fangs are so sharp.
That's good.
And just kind of like, yeah. I just like the way that it kind of addresses the way that women kind of need to be more cautious and more like careful. But I like the way that it's written here as like a wolf, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I really like this one.
Yeah, same here. Same reasons. Just kind of acknowledging the reality, and themes that come up in a lot of the other books and collections we've read.
Yeah.
Feels pretty succinct, and just talking about generational truths and experiences. It's kind of a little sad too, right? Like,
yeah,
thinking about that, like these little girls, and like, this is the world that you have to be ready for. Again, the wolf, again, going back to nature, the fauna, all the animals, all the landscape, desert animals. Desert cannibals, these were an interesting collection. Like, just kind of five pieces, 5 parts, 5 pieces. And I know you liked some of them, right, Vanessa? That stood out to you?
My favorite one was 3 on page 61. So this one specifically is more about the feeling that comes from writing, I guess. The way that it's therapy, but it's also like, I guess we were kind of talking about this earlier, the idea of before you're able to move forward, you have to kind of look back at like traumas and things that you've experienced in order to be able to move forward. So it starts out by saying, I want to be an optimist. I want to be happy, but my mind goes to dark places.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just the way that writing is healing.
And this collection has definitely gone to some dark places.
Yeah.
Right, we could say. I think the next piece is such an interesting contrast to that because it's the reference to Tornillo and the camps holding children, migrant children. And it's just there, you know. We've had this here, and it just, that is a dark place to go, and that's our reality a lot of time. Tornillo, let that roll around in your mouth. Roll those R's tight as a secret.
I
You know, a lot of people didn't want to acknowledge it. And then going back, the way it ends is with, man, lots of dog deaths in here, you know? But I think there's a relatable loss to a lot of us, especially through the lens of animals. And this is what we referenced earlier, right? A dog is a dog is a dog. You know, his nature didn't want to just get away and wander the desert. But of course, it consumes him again, just like our conversation earlier about the landscape. Poor dog, poor Bruno. But we don't need to talk about it. You know that little schnauzer.
Oh, I know. I love schnauzers.
Next one was one of my favorites. Carlos Valencia plays the blues.
Richie Valens for the Gringos.
In case you
I like
didn't
this
know,
one too.
right? They had him. They had him cut his name in half. It tasted easier on the tongue. Valens.
Speaking of tongues,
I want to give a shout out to my buddy Merlin Hepworth. He has a really awesome Richie Valens poem too, kind of about that. But you know, Carlos is a musician. There's not a whole lot of music in here, but this is definitely one of those references. And I think overall the imagery is awesome. The illusions, you know, we talk a lot about ethnomusicology, acknowledging, you know, how a lot of music is born out of different cultures, and the blues in particular has such a deeply entrenched history to it. So here you kind of have like multiple references to farm work, right? And Latinos picking oranges in the
Slavery.
fields. And of course, in slavery, Indio rhythms and slave pain, right?
Daughters of plantation slave masters shiver for cottonwood guitar and matachin beat. I
These
love that.
cross-cultural
Yeah.
things here, and that just reminds me of the border so much. All the influences coming together in that sense. Bulge, he brings in his hands, bulge, he glides over the tender neck. Oh, Donna. 500 years of distortion.
Okay, now you, Vanessa.
Oh, Donna. You guys, you know the song, right? Now that you know that it's
Well, you
Richie
all were
Valens.
doing karaoke last time, so.
FYI, you know, after these episodes.
Or even before the episode.
We get down, you know, pre-show, post-show, karaoke, you know, all that good stuff. So yeah, maybe we'll do that after some Richie Valens, some Madonna. But I just love that those last lines are so dope to me, just because it just takes it all to this image of the musician. 500 years of distortion, fuzz through a broken speaker, propped up on a chair. That just reminds me of like all open mics, you know, it's sometimes messy. It's just like you're putting up a little amp on a chair. It's broken. It's all fuzzy. But, you know, the prelude, everything that he's referencing here is just so great.
Yeah.
Love that.
It's a nice poem. It's kind of a weird one, though. Like, it doesn't
Does you feel like it doesn't fit?
The rest of the collection. That's just me. I wonder why it was included. Not that everything has to be like the same theme or whatever, but I feel like everything else has some sort of connection, and this one was just like, oh, there's a Richie Valens poem in here.
Well, they're border stories, identity. I think as a musician, he's probably thinking about that, and I think it grounds it, especially after. I think that these cannibals is a little bit more lofty.
Right.
5 sections, kind of untethered. There's all these separate vignettes, and it's. I feel Richard Valencia plays the blues, kind of brings it back into,
So that's your response.
Cacophony.
I will ask Carlos that too.
That is a good question, though. We should write that down.
I will. Yeah.
Again, you have the poem that references tradition. Lalo Delgado's estilo. Have you guys read Stupid America? Lalo Delgado?
I have not.
So I think this is a good one too. It's kind of like more reviewing contemporary like mores with immigration, and again reference to cages. Just kind of more of like a rant, frustration.
Yeah.
I think the imagery of the wall you built, where we're learning how to conquer the. It's always kind of been one of the memes, right, with the border wall. Like, ladder. But that third stanza I really love. Stupid America. The wall you built. While Mexico has an entire team of pole vaulters at the ready, and they are eager to teach Mexicans how to soar through the sky like our volador ancestors that flew over Chapultepec for centuries. Like just that imagery, right? Historical. Pole vaulting over the wall. Stupid America. We build your houses. We grow your food. We raise your children. We teach them Spanish. We nurse you when you are sick. It's a good one. Masculine tongue. There's another one right at the tongue.
I told you. I'm just kidding.
Didn't notice that until.
Do you have any strong lines in there?
I think one of my favorites is the second stanza. I can hurl I'm gonna start over.
The entire episode.
Delete the whole thing. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. I can hurl boulders with this tongue, crush armies with this tongue, a wild thing that twists and turns and furls. I really like that one. But yeah, this is a really nice one too.
I mean, I like it. You called it out, the tongue, representing language and what we do, and as a poet, as a writer. It's one of those things. I just love this idea of the universe's infinite collisions and gravities. It's what all these collisions, like borders colliding, gravities. Damn, we're already nearing the end. So like a good tribute, and then I know both of you guys really liked Missing Juarez.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of allusions to celebrities that have.
It made us miss Juarez. Just like how easy it was to just cross over back in the day. And maybe it wasn't that easy, but I think maybe we were naive or I was naive and like, oh, yeah, like every weekend just cross over and just like party and all of these images, the marionettes, the paintings, the carne asada, the clubs, the bars, the crossing of the border, just all these things we kind of take for granted. This is some nice imagery there. Brought back a lot of memories.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, recorded at Power at the Pass and brought to you by Border Census. This episode, we continued our discussion on How to Lie to a Customs Agent by Carlos Fidel Espinoza. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode and follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.